Look, it came out of China, okay? Whether people like to say it or not, everybody knows that. I guess it pretty much, I think that's pretty much known. They tried to blame Europe. They were saying it came out of Europe. It came out of China. Went to Europe, went here, went to 184 countries, probably more than that now. That was a week ago, 184 countries. Can you believe it? And it could have been stopped at the point. It could have been stopped right at the source, and it would have been easy to do, but something happened. Something happened. Either they made a terrible mistake, probably it was incompetent, somebody was stupid, and they didn't do the job that they should have done. It's too bad.
Hello everyone, I'm Christina Bobb. Welcome to the Daily Ledger. Graham Ledger has the night off. Our cover story, the seemingly never-ending battle to hold China accountable. There's no way around it. The coronavirus, this relentless virus that is essentially holding our country and the world hostage, came from China. And one way or another, they need to be held responsible. You'd think this is something the entire world would agree with and stand behind. Thankfully, the Trump administration does not seem to be letting up in attempting to hold China accountable, despite attempts from China and even the mainstream media to thwart their efforts.
China's foreign ministry on Thursday vehemently rejected allegations by U.S. President Donald Trump and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, blaming Beijing for the global coronavirus pandemic.
What China opposes is, since you just mentioned the word oppose, is the US and other countries trying to politicize the origin of the coronavirus and trying to hastily conduct an international inquiry under the presumption of a crime.
Beijing's response comes after Trump this week likened the impact of the coronavirus to infamous surprise attacks against the United States.
This is worse than Pearl Harbor. This is worse than the World Trade Center. There's never been an attack like this. Could have been stopped in China. It should have been stopped right at the source.
If you liken the coronavirus epidemic to Pearl Harbor or the 9/11 attack, then the enemy the US faces this time is the coronavirus, because that is the common enemy of all humanity.
But if Beijing doesn't like getting blamed by Washington, it may nevertheless get ready to hear a lot of it. Trump campaign aides say his re-election pitch will focus on the messages that China is to blame and that the president is the only candidate who can rebuild the U.S. economy and hold Beijing accountable. A Trump campaign spokesman told Reuters, quote, "Voters know China was a bad actor on the virus. The president made clear to pinpoint China as the origin of the virus. We're going to push this."
China is a very sophisticated country, and they could have contained it. They were either unable to or they chose not to.
The re-election efforts will also attempt to paint the presumptive Democratic candidate Joe Biden as not tough enough on China.
China would like to see sleepy Joe Biden. They would take this country for a ride like you've never seen before.
Trump officials say the message pushed to Republican state party leaders across the country and in new anti-Biden ads reflects polling data that show voters trust Trump more on the economy and that Americans across party lines distrust China.
Regardless of the biased media's opinion on the matter, China needs to answer for their mishandling of the virus. And thank God we currently have an administration that has the guts to take them on. Joining me now from our bureau in Washington, D.C., political commentator and president for Americans for Limited Government, Richard Manning. Good evening. I understand your organization has put a lot of effort to ensure the world holds China accountable. Tell us about your efforts.
Well, it's really simple. We've put up a website as stopchinathreat.org, and we've been pushing for weeks the timelines related to China's malfeasance. You know, it was China that said that there was no human-to-human transmission of the virus back in January, which the World Health Organization repeated, giving legitimacy to that false claim. It was China that shut down their own travel, internal travel from Hubei province, which is where Wuhan is, and they shut down internal travel, but they allowed international travel to continue. In fact, as late as early February, they actually encouraged international flights from Wuhan to around the world when they knew that the people on those flights were likely carriers of this disease. So China holds a great deal of responsibility, not for just containing it, but not for behaving responsibly once they knew the danger of this virus. And their irresponsibility, their choices they made have led to hundreds of thousands of people dying around the world, and economic disruption unlike anything we've ever seen in this country.
Wow, that is disturbing. Why do you think there isn't more of an uproar about this? And what can we do to foster the discussion?
Well, I think one of the things that's clear is the minute you talk about a China-originated virus, there's a whole set of interest groups that leap to the fore and say, oh, that's racist. It isn't racist. It's an accurate depiction of what happened. It was originated in China, and China failed to do what the responsible thing to do was, which was to contain it and take measures to contain it. They contained it from their own population, but they unleashed it in the world because they allowed travel around the world. That's a simple fact. It's undisputable, and it is really the core of why we have a worldwide pandemic costing hundreds of thousands of lives. And China needs to own up to that. Otherwise, right now, they're really forfeiting their place in the world. And if they're not willing to take responsibility for their failures, then you really can't trust them in the future as they seek to become partners in the world once again.
All right, so we have this pandemic. We have the facts that this originated out of China. How do we hold them accountable?
Well, I think there's a number of things that need to be done. The Trump administration did something very smart last week, and they said we're not going to allow for federal pension funds to be invested in Chinese equities and Chinese bonds. That was allowing the Chinese markets, which are manipulated, to effectively impact federal pensioners. That same thing should be transmitted across all private pension plans. China investment's too risky for American pensioners. Secondly, we need a full investigation as to what happened so we can write a how not to do it manual for the future. When a future pandemic arises, a future coronavirus-like disease virus arises, we need to develop that. Three, we need to end the Confucius Institutes within our United States. The Chinese have put a bunch of Confucius Institutes on our academic institutions, and the FBI has identified them as places where spies are being developed and research is being stolen from our universities.
All right, I'm going to ask a question there real fast. What type of Confucius Institutes are you referring to?
Well, Confucius Institutes are institutes that are funded by China on college campuses with the ostensibly to promote knowledge about China and Chinese culture. The reality of the Confucius Institute is that many of them have turned into hotbeds of spying. And this isn't me saying this. This is FBI Director Wray saying this. So we need to cut them off at the knees right now. And lastly, I need to make the point, we can no longer be dependent upon China for our pharmaceutical and medical supply needs. We need to have alternative supply chains because China will block those supply chains as we saw during this pandemic.
That's a really interesting point. Can you tell me more about the information that you have on the pharmaceuticals from China?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing we know is that China very early, well, they basically bought up a lot of the supplies dealing with PPE, and then we're holding them up, and we're holding the rest of the world hostage because they own the supplies. On pharmaceuticals, many of the pharmaceutical compounds are made in China. They've been outsourced from the United States and elsewhere around the world to China, and this is just a relatively simple thing, although it's complex in accomplishing. It is unsafe to have the Chinese control the medicines that Americans and the rest of the world need. That is unwise, it's bad policy, and we have to work with those pharmaceutical companies and the medical device manufacturers to make certain that we are never, ever again dependent upon a country who is so irresponsible as to allow a virus to be spread around the world due to their own incompetence or negligence.
Thank you. And real quick, I'm running out of time, but if I understand correctly, your organization has a petition in support of President Trump to try to hold China accountable. Can you tell us about that real fast, please?
Sure. StopChinaThreat.org. It's a White House petition. You click on it, you go right to the petition, you sign it, it goes to the White House. And we don't collect names, we get nothing out of this. What we want is for President Trump to know that it's okay for him to hold China accountable, and that we'll have his back when he does.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on this evening.